I'll give you the history. In 1987, I was assigned to the Pentagon at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and we were in charge of pretty much everything in the Middle East. And in 1987, the Defense Intelligence Agency did an assessment that if Iran launched another offensive, which we expected in the spring of 1988, every year the Iranians launched an offensive, we believed that they would be able to move from where they were on the Fal Peninsula, take El Basra, and then move closer to Baghdad. We believed that if they did that, they might win the war. There was a report sent over to the White House, and Ronald Reagan, president at the time, decided that an Iranian victory was unacceptable to American foreign policy. So in early 1988, I and another officer were sent to Baghdad to make contact with the Iraqi military intelligence service and offer intelligence information to the Iraqi armed forces. I went to Baghdad. We made contact with the deputy director of military intelligence, and he accepted our offer, and I began providing the intelligence to the Iraqis.
Right. What exactly precipitated the move in '87 to take this next step to closely collaborate with the forces of Iraq?
Well, we had been watching the Iraqis follow this war very closely, but by 1987 it was obvious to us that the Iraqis were no longer in a position to survive. It looked to us like the Iranians had finally gotten the upper hand, and they were every year just pushing the Iraqis further and further back. And the report we wrote was called At the Gates of Basra. And we thought that Basra was the key, particularly in the south. And if the Iranians were able to push, they had taken the Fal Peninsula. And we figured the next move would be to take Basra and then roll up that road right up the valleys to Baghdad. So we were very concerned that we were watching an Iranian victory in progress.
And what did you personally, I mean, after all these years, what has dawned on you, besides the other information that has come to you through the years, that it could be new information right now about that particular space of time?
Well, you know, what we did back then has pretty much come out. There's not much that's left to tell. It was a very short-lived operation. We began it very early in 1988, and it ended in late August of 1988 when the war ended, when the fighting stopped. We stopped our relationship. The military stopped our relationship with the Iraqis. I understand the Central Intelligence Agency, they maintained some sort of relationship with the Iraqis after that, but the Defense Intelligence Agency, my relationship with the Iraqis ended when the war ended. So it was a very short-lived thing. Our point of view, from the American point of view, it was very successful because we were able to provide, I think, to the Iraqis that enabled them to strike the Iranians at the right places to blunt the offensive. The offensive never occurred because mostly the Iraqi Air Force was able to stop the Iranian logistics that were necessary to launch that spring offensive, which never came.
How off the mark were the Iraqis without your intelligence?
That's a really good question. It's hard to say because you don't know what could have been if you hadn't done something. But I think we assisted the Iraqis in blunting the Iranian offensive. Now, could they have done it without our help? I don't know. I tend to think not so. I think the Iranians probably would have won the war had we not helped.
Did you have any ideas that Saddam is going to use sarin gas?
No. We were following the Iraqi missile developments, and we suspected that he had chemical weapons. We knew that he had used mustard. Both sides had used mustard during the war. We were surprised when Halabja happened, and as we look back in retrospect years later, to us, it looked like Halabja was merely a test of the nerve agent. And once they determined that the nerve agent was effective because they were able to kill so many people in that one strike, then we saw it used on the Foul Peninsula. Now, this was a major development, and it caused us a lot of problems because I was in Baghdad when they used the chemicals in Halabja. And it took a while for us to figure it out that it was the Iraqis and that they had used nerve gas. And then a month later, they had their operation. It was Blessed Ramadan Mubarak, that liberated the Foul Peninsula or retook the Foul Peninsula. And I went down to the Foul Peninsula very soon after the battle, and it was obvious to anybody that was there that they had used chemical weapons on the battlefield. Now, this caused us a lot of problems because the United States now cannot be seen helping a country that is using chemical weapons, especially chemical weapons against their own people. So we stopped our support for the Iraqis. I went back to Washington, and there were a series of high-level meetings. Of course, I was not in them. And the question was, do we continue to help the Iraqis, a country that is using chemical weapons, and maybe meet an American foreign policy objectives, and that was to make sure that the Iranians did not win? Or do we stop helping the Iraqis and maybe watch the Iranians proceed to victory? Our assistance to the Iraqis was really not about helping Saddam Hussein. It was about stopping the Iranians. It's a subtle difference, but we were more interested in the Iranian angle than the Iraqi angle.
Why was President Reagan so determined to tilt the war as he did, and why was he so fervently wanting intelligence to come into the field and aid Saddam's forces against Iran? Why?
Well, he was concerned that the Iranians were going to win, and he was so concerned. Ronald Reagan was very wary of the Iranian regime, and he was concerned that an Iranian victory in Iraq would allow the Iranians to spread the Iranian Revolution much further, and he wanted to put that in check. He was also very concerned that if the Iranians were able to take over Iraq or dominate the Iraqis, then what would be next? Would it be Kuwait? Would it be Saudi Arabia? This all goes back to oil and who controls the Middle East oil fields.
Mm-hmm. What prompted you to write the book Ally to Adversary?
Well, I just thought it was interesting that in 1987, 1988, we were helping the Iraqis, and here we are in 1990, 91, fighting the Iraqis. And I had a pretty unique view of this because I had spent time with the Iraqi forces in Baghdad and out in the field, Foul Peninsula, Shalamja, Majnoon Islands, and watching this and working very closely with the Iraqis. And then 2 years later, we are engaged in a war against these very same officers. So it was just my perspective of how our foreign policy is not really dictated by alliances, but more on national interest. I look at this from the lens of U.S. foreign policy. At that time, 1987, 1988, our focus was not having the Iranians win the war. So our strategy to do that was to help the Iraqis. Really had nothing to do with Saddam Hussein, nothing to do with the Iraqis. This was all about Iran. If you look at American foreign policy since World War II in the Persian Gulf, it's always been about Iran because they're the big players in the region. And we've always been very concerned since the fall of the Shah of Iranian power. So in 1987, we regarded that as a threat. Our foreign policy objective was to blunt that power. And in a short period of time, we were able to do it via the Iraqis. To call it an alliance might be a bit of a misnomer. It was more of they were a convenient method by which we were able to conduct our foreign policy, which was to stop the Iranians. Now, as I look back at it, I think it was very, very effective. We were given the task. We've got to make sure the Iranians don't win this, and I think we were effective in doing that. So I look at it as that was my tasking, and I thought we carried it out fairly effectively.